Affairs. Meeting will now come to order. Before we get started, are there any bill introductions this morning? Seeing none, I do need to make note before we get started. The appointment of Jason Kenobi last week, or earlier in the week, I believe it was, there's some confusion over what exact position that the governor is appointing him to. And so before we can produce the committee report, we need to get that cleared up. So we may, early next week, have to go back through the process very quickly and re-approve his nomination. So that is coming. Also, you might note, for anybody who's watching online or in the audience, there were some problems with our agenda on the Kansas Legislature website. That has been fixed as of this morning. We will have no meetings tomorrow for federal and state affairs. Next week looks like a very packed week. It's still kind of fluid, but we will probably work all 5 days next week, just as note. So with that, yesterday we had the proponent and the neutral testimony on Senate Bill 135. Today we'll reopen that hearing for Senate Bill 135 for our oral opponent testimony. As with yesterday, we're going to do a 40-minute block, and we will give each conferee up to 5 minutes. Doesn't mean you have to take 5 minutes. If you go less, fine. If you go the full 5 minutes, that's fine. But once the 40 minutes has expired, that's when we'll stop and open to questions. So with that, our first oral opponent for Senate Bill 135 is Senator Mark Steffen. Senator?
Looks like we're on. Thank you. Mark Steffen, Senate District 34. Thank you for your time. I want to throw a little bit at you from a medical doctor's perspective. You know, marijuana is a drug. The THC and all those associated molecules are a drug. They can be very, very problematic. Very problematic for a society, very problematic for an individual. We know marijuana, particularly as it is today, is highly addictive, in line with that of methamphetamine. We know at the concentrations that it's being produced at now, it causes psychosis. We hear all about mental health disease, mental health disease, mental health disease. The reality is a lot of that is being exposed because of drug addictions, and that's marijuana. You throw a low level of mental health disease and you throw on marijuana and you have an emergency room full of psychotic individuals that are being labeled as mental health disease. But this is supposed to be medicinal marijuana. We all know that's a ruse. Medical marijuana is nothing but a waypoint to get to recreational marijuana, where the goal will be to produce as many users, as much demand for this drug as possible. Our society cannot stand that. From a medical standpoint, again, from a drug standpoint, last year we passed HB 2540 into law. It affected the KSA 21-5701 and rescheduled some of these medications, these FDA-approved medications that contain THC molecules. That's the dronabinols, Marinol, Syndrose, Sativex, Sesamet. These are all THC-containing medications where the dosage is known, it's regulated, where we can prescribe a therapeutic, appropriate dose to any and every Kansan with a prescription from a physician. It's for pain, seizures, nausea, all the things that THC is supposed to treat. It's not a mainline medication for any of these diseases, for any of these symptoms. It's a very low-level medication as far as efficacy is concerned. You know, bottom line, we're playing with a very dangerous game here. Our society is already struggling with not enough workforce. Anybody who thinks legalizing marijuana is going to help our society, take a look at Oklahoma, take a look at Colorado. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Senator. And I failed to mention that I will give you time cues if you get close to your 5 minutes. I'll hold up a finger for 1 minute left. This is 30 seconds. Like that? Yeah, no. And then this is wrap it up. So that's our time cues, just as we did yesterday. Worked pretty well. Next up, we have Brian Sherber, Deputy Director of Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics. Is Brian on WebEx, or is he here in the?
I'm on WebEx. Can you guys hear me?
Okay. We've got you, Brian. Thank you, sir. And your 5 minutes begins now.
Well, there's a lot of things we can talk about with marijuana legalization. The two things I think I can speak from experience is kind of the process, and then the impact that I think it's important for this committee to know. First is, I don't know what's happened there in Kansas. I can tell you what happens with legalization efforts. Much like most reform efforts, there's kind of a formula. You have people, proponents, and industry individuals that seek to make quite a bit of money with the legalization are the ones pushing it. Oftentimes you have a myth of users that are in prison, oftentimes with a poster child. They'll go and have say that it's spending time in prison for just giving his roommates marijuana or simple possession. They quit using last names in Oklahoma now, because every time this person's never who they purport to be. So they just use first names now here. In Oklahoma, we have to track down who they're talking about. There's always promises of money with some abstract formula, again, typically put forward by an interest group with theoretical amounts. There's you don't typically have physicians, but anecdotes of how it would help, and it's just presented as basically a false binary choice without the consequences of legalization ever being sufficiently addressed. What I can also talk about is the black market. Now, there's the idea that this is an absence of regulation. Just doesn't comport with our experience here. We have things with residency. I think we have a similar thing there, where we passed a law after our referendum to make sure that we residents, and overnight we had an entire industry of black market industries that used straw owners that paid people off to be the Oklahoma resident on paper. Again, we've had just a massive, widespread international groups that have come into Oklahoma that seek to exploit the law to find ways around it. Sometimes they talk about a seed-to-sale tracking system, and I'll tell you now we've had a seed-to-sale tracking system that was supposed to go into effect August of 2019. That was not in our referendum. It was passed subsequently by the legislature. Now, what happened is pursuant to litigation, a temporary restraining order was put in place, and it wasn't put in place in Oklahoma until the spring of 2022, with again some grace periods, but it was in full force in effect. And again, I could get into the aspects of how it's bypassed. There's certain ways. It typically is at the processing. We've done a wiretap months and months and months after it was fully in effect. And again, it didn't slow that down. That wiretap being involving multiple grows in a foreign language with an international crime syndicate that was operating. And just as one anecdote on the seed-to-sale tracking system, one of our marijuana groups took all the training to see how it worked. Been working it for months. Didn't realize that there was even supposed to be a sticker placed on what we call batching at the processing level, which is where a lot of the diversion and bypassing it takes place. Because in all of the investigations they'd seen, assisting on interdiction stops going out there, cases they've worked, had never seen one of these stickers that was actually put out there. This wiretap, I went out on that on the takedown. The tags, the zip tie tags, were at the front of at the grow rooms at the front, not at the back. There's buckets of them oftentimes that are there. I talked to one of our supervisors of one of our marijuana enforcement units, and they've not seen anyone fully in compliance with the seed-to-sale tracking system. It helps, but again, it is one of those things that has not been any kind of panacea as will be promised. But again, you could take my word for it in my experience, but I think we have more recent things.
Got 1 minute, Mark, or Brian, 1 minute.
Okay. Look, anyone in Oklahoma can get a card. It's recreational, as the previous senator had just testified to. So we had a vote just 9 days ago on full recreational. But again, we have that there. It was pushed again by the industry. It was really a referendum on the impact of legalization in Oklahoma. The proponents of this recreational state question outspent the opponents 20-1 with flyers, commercials, all of this. That being said, In 77 counties in Oklahoma, that referendum failed in every single county. 77 out of 77 failed by 24 points. In some rural counties, it failed by 81%. That'll tell you the impact that medical marijuana pushed by them, these industries, has had in Oklahoma, and how Oklahomans have dealt with that in their opinions. Thank you very much. Good luck to my friends in the North.
Thank you very much, Brian. We appreciate your testimony. Next up, we have Sheriff Jeff Easter from Sedgwick County, the chair of the Kansas Sheriff's Association. Jeff?
Good morning. I am representing, I'm Jeff Easter, the sheriff of Sedgwick County. I'm also the legislative chair for the KSA, or Kansas Sheriff's Association. I'm representing the Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police, Sheriff's Association, and KPOA. Our associations are opposed to the passage of Senate Bill 135. I'll go through several of those reasons, but it is also clear that no other state going down this path has found the right balance needed to create taxes to properly fund enforcement and programs, including rehabilitation services. Real-time law enforcement access to the database of registered medical marijuana users and caregivers is critical. We must be able to verify a person's registration status if they tell us they are registered but don't have their card with them, the status and validity of a card presented to us by name or by number, and the allowable 30-day supply. This can be accomplished in a secure and controlled manner via the Kansas Criminal Justice Information System, the same way we obtain driver's license records and criminal records. There is a provision to allow law enforcement access to the prescription monitoring program. However, the Board of Pharmacy has expressed concern with that access in the past. It is also unclear if the prescription monitoring data will include some of the information the bill proposes it to share with law enforcement, such as the name, date of birth, and unique ID number card, or even the designated 30-day supply for each patient. We are particularly concerned with the real-time registration information on users and caregivers, since that originates from the Department of Health and Environment. We requested this in our interim testimony. We believe the user and caregiver registration is best provided with the connection between the Department of Health and Environment database of registrations and Kansas Criminal Justice Information System. We did not find anything requiring a person to possess their user or caregiver registration card while possessing marijuana. We believe the law must require any registration document to be in the person's possession when possessing cannabis, and require it to be presented to a law enforcement officer on request. This should mirror the same thing that we have for driver's license laws. The second piece of this is specific to jails. We believe an exemption for county jails is essential, so they're not required to allow prisoners to have medical marijuana while incarcerated. This is an example of the hazards of calling a federally prohibited drug medicine. At some point, a court will surely rule that the state has declared this medicine, and will have to not only allow them to have access to it while in the jail, but the counties will have to provide it for them because the state has deemed it to be medicine. This needs to be a clear prohibition stating medical marijuana cannot be taken into a jail for any reason. We also requested this in the interim testimony. The next thing is, Section 17 of the bill requires honoring out-of-state medical marijuana user identification cards for both possessing and purchasing of medical marijuana. There is no national registry of registered medical marijuana users. We doubt the proponents would support such a national registry. This means there is no way we can know if the card is valid or not, nor would we be able to know what a 30-day supply of marijuana is authorized. It will be nearly impossible to control the abuse from this provision. Two things that I want to point out. We currently have a case in Sedgwick County where a Deputy Sidney Gardner, was killed in a traffic accident. That is an open case. I can't go into a lot of detail, but what I can tell you is the individual that was doing 88 miles an hour when he ran a stop sign out in the county and killed our deputy was high on marijuana. And the problem that we're having, KHP is working that case, which is very similar to what we hear from Colorado, is how much is too high. We know what the rate is for DUI. It's over 0.08. We don't know what that is for marijuana, so we have to bring in a lot more experts to try to testify to say that the level in his blood is too high to be driving. Recreational marijuana will lead to that. Secondly, what I will tell you, I testified in CBD stuff here a few years back and heard all the stories of, well, no, that this won't happen and that won't happen. I'm telling you it's happening. I have friends that drank a lot in their past, have decided to start taking CBD that's legal, that's below 0.3%, that is also called Delta 9. one of which took one, and I wasn't there because I left. He couldn't drive home. He had to spend the night there. The other one, and he took a full gummy. The other one took a half gummy and was like, I shouldn't be driving. I had to call for an Uber. It was worse than drinking. That's legal currently, and we were told by the marijuana supporters CBD would never do that. It's doing it right now. So we're already facing this problem with CBD. I don't know if they have mislabeled the bottle, because I looked at the bottle and they showed it to me. It's legal to sell. So we're opening up a Pandora's box by allowing this to happen. So thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Perfect timing, 4:57. Next up is Tony Mativi, our director of the Kansas Bureau of can't talk this morning, Investigation. Good morning, Tony.
Good morning, Senator. Good morning, members of the committee. My testimony this morning will focus on three areas: primarily the impact on our forensic science laboratory, secondarily the public safety impact I believe it will have on our state, and third, the difficulty with enforcement of medical cannabis. If you look at the act, it allows plant material to contain up to 35% THC. That's not a restriction. That's what our lab is seeing with regard to how much THC you can find naturally occurring in plant material. What that means, I believe, based on the data, is that we're going to see a rise in the number of extraction laboratories. Extraction laboratories primarily rely on butane to extract the THC from the cannabis. I fear that we will be back in the days of meth labs and meth lab explosions all across our state, because that's what will happen in these extraction laboratories. Tinctures, oils, and concentrates are allowed to have up to 60% THC. Under the Act, patches can have 10 milligrams of THC. That's significant, I believe, especially when you compare it with edibles. Edibles are allowed to contain up to 3.5 grams of THC. A patch is 10 milligrams. An edible can have 350 times that. Okay? That is the equivalent of 17.5 joints per edible, whether it's a gummy or a candy bar. Not only does that tremendously increase our exposure to pediatric overdoses, but it even increases our exposure to adult overdoses, because if an adult eats a gummy and doesn't feel the effects immediately, they can take another gummy, and then they can eat another gummy. And by the time they start to feel the effects of one of them, they have the equivalent of more than 50 joints in their system. That's why our neighbors, that's one of the reasons our neighbors are struggling with legalized marijuana. An issue that's of particular importance to our forensic laboratory is THC quantitation. Our laboratory and those very expensive, very complicated machines in the lab can only quantitate vegetative material up to 0.3% as allowed in the Industrial Hemp Act. Okay? They can probably get up to about 2%, but nowhere close to 35% as is allowed under the bill in vegetation, or certainly 60% as allowed for tinctures and oils. Not only that, but not only can the lab not quantitate up to those levels, but the lab will have to come up with a different method of quantitating every single type of edible, right? So a gummy has to be quantitated differently than chocolates or brownies or hard candies. Okay, each of those is imposing another burden on our already overburdened forensic science laboratory. And then finally, the scientists tell me that the sugars in those edibles are incredibly damaging to the equipment that's being used to test them. One of my concerns as KBI director is we have a replacement cycle for those machines. Each machine costs about $180,000. Their life expectancy is 7 to 10 years. Some of our machines are 20 years old, and I'm concerned that we aren't on a frequent enough replacement cycle for those machines. Having to test edibles is only going to make that worse. My friend Sheriff Easter has already addressed a couple of the enforcement challenges that I had planned to talk about, so I'll skip over those. You'll notice that the bill has a fingerprint criminal history record check requirement only for those who own 20% or more of any sort of facility. That is a huge gap. One of the things I've learned in almost 30 years in law enforcement is criminals figure out ways to use our laws against that. That is a gap that I guarantee you they will figure out a way to use. I'm very concerned about Section 71 of the bill because it is essentially decriminalization of marijuana. Okay, so not only are we talking about legalizing medical marijuana, but if you read Section 71 closely, it's effectively decriminalizing marijuana as well. We have looked at the records. Thank you, sir. We've looked at the records. It is a myth that people are doing time for simple possession of marijuana. There is not a single person sitting in a Kansas jail cell right now for simple possession of marijuana. That's a myth. Let me close with this. I have done a lot of reading on this topic since I took this job. Much of the material provided to me by my friend Dr. Voth, that you will meet no better or more qualified expert on the topic. The thing that he sent me that was the most persuasive was a study that showed the link between increased THC use in our adolescents and mental illness. If there is one thing that I would think we would all agree on, it would be that we don't want to facilitate access by our kids to something that is going to adversely impact their mental health. I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time. Senator, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Yes, we will open for questions after our 40-minute time has run out. We've got about 20 minutes left. Next up, we have Steve Howe from our Johnson County District Attorney's Office. Is Steve on WebEx? Oh, he's still testifying. So we'll skip over Steve and go to Dr. Voth, Eric Voth, who's a medical doctor, and bring Eric up, and your 5 minutes begins now, Eric.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Eric Voth. For those of you that don't know me, I practiced here in Topeka for 36 years, internal medicine, pain and addiction medicine. I've been involved in the whole addiction world for at least 40, and I've testified around the country and actually internationally on the marijuana issue. Because of our limited time today, I'm going to confine my comments to a tight area. First, I want to cut back to yesterday where you received testimony that said there's no such a thing as schizophrenia or psychosis caused by marijuana. I've provided the committee with a handout that has 52 articles that outline many of the various psychiatric disorders, including psychosis. And there is also a clear relationship with marijuana concentrates above 10%. Keep that in mind. 10% is where that threshold begins to show up. We're talking now in this legislation of leaf marijuana at 35% and the concentrates or oils at 60. That's 60%, which means 1 gram of that concentrate oil delivers 600 milligrams of THC, whereas if you came to my office and received a legitimate prescription for Marinol, I would be giving you around 5 or 10 milligrams. So that's a toxic level that's allowed. I want to go into the bill itself because it's highly flawed, so many areas, but I'm going to nail down about 7. The first one is the number of diagnoses that are allowed. This is absolutely spurious. It's putting out 22 diagnoses that supposedly have medicine behind them, and I'm telling you that the only diagnosis that really appears to be legit, that really has some science behind it, is certain forms of pain. And I'll tell you that recent work on this has even shot those down, suggesting that there's more of a placebo effect than actual benefit from pain. The other thing that completely blows me away is the way that these can be added to with just almost by fiat, simply by an individual saying, I benefit from marijuana, I want my diagnosis added, which is ridiculous. In today's world, real science, real medicine brings medications through the FDA, and they go through a rigorous process for approval. This bypasses all of that. I've talked to you about my concerns about the percentages of THC that are allowed. I will tell you that's also very consistent with the industry bills that have been floating around the country. Some have pushed for 90. Many try to now, because we're bringing up concerns about this, are pushing for 60%, which again is highly toxic. The bill does not require nor allow for the labeling of dose, content, contaminants, or any kind of recommendations for concern of the packaging. If you go and buy Tylenol you're going to see a circular that comes with that has a whole host of concerns, et cetera, that the consumer needs to be aware of. That is not present. Then we're going to see another bureaucracy form here in Kansas. It would be under KDHD that's already got their hands full in many ways, and this would then open up a whole new bureaucracy at KDHE that has to be administered. I know that there's been concern voiced about minors' exposure. There was testimony saying that it would not allow minors to be exposed, but I will tell you, if supervised by parents, which in and of itself should constitute child abuse and endangerment, children can be given THC by their parents under this legislation. I'd be open for questions later. I just want to say that I've testified and reviewed cases or these kinds of legislations across the country. There is no question in my mind that this is not brought to you by legitimate medical entities. This is straight out of the marijuana industry. It's targeted to benefit the marijuana industry and not the health of Kansans. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Next up, we have Lauren Schiffman. And we will start your time as soon as I get my little cursor going here. All righty, Lauren, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson, committee members. My name is Lauren Schiffman. I'm a private citizen, and I am here in complete opposition of SB 135. Fortunately, we can learn from other states that have legalized marijuana and see the damage that it's done. They have seen crimes rise, devastating health effects, and most concerning, the high potency of these drugs that are labeled as medicine. There's no way to control the black market. It's just going to run rampant like it did in Oklahoma. You know, see, states, they like these things because they look at this, maybe this is a good way to make some extra money. But do we really want to damage our society just for a little extra cash for our budget? Medical marijuana, and I'm using quotes because it's really not that way. I think it's a complete ruse. You hear it in the deceptive marketing. Just the other day, I was listening to an ad from Missouri talking about the medicine. Come down to the dispensary to get your medicine. But the thing is there's no ingredient list, just like the doctor stated. There's no dose control by the doctor. There's no regulatory. Are these patients being followed up on from their medication on a regular basis with their physicians? They're not. They just get their card. They can get as much as they want throughout that month, and then they go on from there. I really fear that this will just lead to recreational use. It will addict our society. It will cause out-of-control crime and really the demise of our society. In addition, there's absolutely no reason to legalize marijuana, just like the doctor said. If you need THC, you can get a legal prescription, and that's really the safest route. So, as I stated before, my most concern is the high potency rate of these marijuanas these days. It's not the same that it used to be. So please listen to our medical doctors that have testified today and weeks ago. Today's marijuana is as addictive as methamphetamines and 10 times worse than to our lungs than tobacco. The last thing we need is yet another chronic health condition to have to manage in our society. Please stop this bill. Please do it for our kids and protect Kansans from this deceptive marijuana lobby. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lauren. I see the district attorney has arrived. If you've caught your breath, Steve, we'll go ahead and get your testimony. Stephen Howe from the Johnson County District. Well, he is the district attorney for Johnson County.
Yes.
And 5 minutes. I'll give you 1 minute if you.
That'd be great.
30 seconds and wrap it up. So there you go.
It's longer than a commercial on your previous.
I'm used to 3 minutes on the weather, so that's it.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for working with me on. I was coming down from the Senate Judiciary testifying on a bill. You know, really, I looked through this bill and some of the provisions, and it really deeply concerned me from a public health and a public safety issue. First of all, the list of ailments. In talking to doctors, I don't see how those actually are backed by evidence in clinical trials, which deeply concerns me. I talked to the Veterans Treatment Court. We talked a couple weeks ago about this in Missouri, which has legalized it. They don't allow their veterans in Veterans Treatment Court in Clay County, to use marijuana, and for obvious reasons. The VA doesn't do it there. It doesn't do it in my jurisdiction. It's because it doesn't help those veterans. It's actually counterproductive, and the VA does not prescribe that. So I just wanted to let you know that. My concerns about this bill is it enacts protections that you see in no other area of law or no legislative matter that's ever been before you. Let me talk about what those provisions are. Medical malpractice, totally immune from going after a doctor for prescribing this to an adult or a child. Never have we had this where it gives basically immunity to doctors to prescribe whatever they want. Caregiver provisions. That is a very loosely termed definition, caregiver, but it allows people to make health decisions for another person. Under the laws of the state of Kansas, power of attorney for health reasons is the legal method to do that. This bill throws that away and doesn't require it at all. The provisions about minors. Now, I think there's compelling evidence that children and adolescents, that giving cannabis to that age group is highly dangerous to them. This bill allows that to happen. And the only thing that it requires is that a parent sign off on it. But it goes farther than that. If a parent is under the influence and does not take care of their child, and the child walks out and wanders the street, we can't file the child in need of care proceeding. If the child overdoses on cannabis, we can't file a child in need of care proceeding. It just totally gives immunity to people to commit acts of neglect and abuse to children, which I find highly offensive that it would even be a component within this bill. So basically, you've got those provisions. On public safety issues, once again, I reviewed this bill. There is nothing to stop the black market sales of marijuana. And as Mr. Serber indicated, news alert, the criminals don't follow the law. So whatever provisions we put in there, they're going to do what they're going to do. And we don't want to be in that situation like Oklahoma where you have straw owners basically being the front people for the cartel and other people who want to take advantage of Kansans. And then also the huge bureaucracy we're creating. I noticed the fiscal note doesn't even indicate that we're going to be making money on this deal. It's actually going to be something that is going to be a wash, if not in the red. I also want to remind you about the violence we see associated with marijuana. Mark Bennett and I have the two biggest jurisdictions in the state, and the vast majority of the killings and shootings are directly associated with marijuana. So this misnomer that it is people who are not violent belies the truth. And nothing about this bill being passed, if you look at Oklahoma, Missouri, and Colorado, will change that. It will not change that equation. And in fact, it continues on in those jurisdictions. And the last thing is driving while drugged. This is a highly difficult situation for prosecutors and law enforcement to be able to handle. It's something, we don't have a .08 for marijuana. It's going to be very difficult. What's interesting is my law enforcement officers can arrest somebody with a small amount of marijuana in those situations. And guess what? This bill allows them, after the fact, to get a get-out-of-jail-free card, which is a letter from a doctor. So it's not, they don't even have the letter when they have the marijuana, but if they get a letter after the fact, this bill allows them to basically get a get-out-of-jail-free card. Again, another exception. So if we talk about what this bill does, exceptions to standards of law in the SINC, child in need of care, power of attorney, medical malpractice, banking, criminal statutes. If this is such a great bill with great effect for people, then why do you have to create all these exceptions to establish standards of law? Follow the evidence, folks. That's what I tell juries. Follow the evidence, and the evidence points you, just as the federal government said in their big ad campaign, just say no.
Thank you, Mr. DA. Our next testimony comes from Donna Lippold, Director of Culture Shield Network. Just for note, we're down to about 7 minutes. of testimony time left. Donna?
I'll make it really quick.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator Thompson and committee. I have an organization that really works to protect families. I'm trying to get this down here for me. Okay. Anyway, so I just have done a lot of research since last fall and worked on this. I guess you're probably aware that our own Senator Roger Marshall made a video with other doctors, senators in the U.S. Senate, and said that it's possible for marijuana to be laced with fentanyl. Fentanyl is one of the it's the largest killer in our nation, and so why would we ever take an opportunity to make money off of something that is killing our children? WIBW just announced on Monday that Kansas is going to miss an opportunity to make money and provide jobs. Well, I think that for most of us, we as citizens of Kansas, we really don't want our very ill people paying our taxes. We don't want people who are addicted paying our taxes. We think that we ought to pay our taxes. So I reject the fact that we can get tax revenue from something like this. I think it's just embarrassing, to tell you the truth. One of the things I'm just going to skip down to the children who have died as a result of the edibles. I have sent my testimony. There is a link there where you can see the marijuana-related child deaths. Some people will deny this ever happened. This link will tell you that it has. So the man who's the sheriff in Oklahoma did a sting on an operation and found out that there was human trafficking labor taking place, living in horrible conditions, 48 people living in those conditions with $50 million and 27,000 plants. So there's just all these opportunities for us to say no. Thank you. There's really no right time to do a wrong thing. And to quote President Dwight D. Eisenhower, the opportunist thinks me and today. The statesman thinks us and tomorrow.
Thank you, Donna. And that quote is actually down in the visitor center. Very nice. Next up, and Philip Cosby. Philip, we're down to 4 minutes and 48 seconds. So
I can do that. Thank you,
Thank you,
Mr.
sir.
Chairman. Philip Cosby, American Family Action. This is not normally my lane. Been lobbying for about 18 years, but this is important. You might think, what do I bring to the subject of marijuana? I was stationed in Asia in 1969 to 71. When I got out of the Army, I went to college in California. I drove a 57 primer gray Volkswagen bus. Now, I will let your imagination fill in whether I inhaled or not. Mr. DA, please don't hold that against me. If you see the movie Jesus Revolution, I lived there, you'll understand the transformation that occurred. So with that context, don't buy this lemon. You're looking at a car to purchase. Unfortunately, you have heard some reviews, and you can read the reviews. There are no good news on this vehicle. The dealer is telling you, literally the dealer is telling you, hurry up, beat Nebraska. This is a great deal. You're going to make a whole lot of money. Buy this car. But you've slipped into the driver's seat and you turn it on and you've got nothing but red lights. You might as well call it a rocket ship. There are so many red lights. Last fall when they had these hearings, you had the KBI, the Alcoholic Beverage Control, Kansas Board of Pharmacy, State Board of Healing Arts, Department of Agriculture, Police Chief and Sheriff's Association, League of the Kansas Municipalities pointed out 77 flaws in this bill. It is not fixable. Do not drive this car off the lot. There is no warranty on return. There is a lot of buyer's regret. You've heard it from Oklahoma, Toklahoma now, you might say. You also have flashing lights from the American College of Pediatricians, Psychiatric Times, National Institute of Health, Food and Drug Administration, Psychology Today. IQ declines by 5.5%. Now, considering my misspent youth, that may explain a lot of things about Philip Cosby. 5.5% is a lot of volume. Anyone visited Seattle lately? Portland? The homelessness, the feces on the streets? The problem is a drug problem. It is not a homeless problem. Johnson County is now going to have tiny houses for the homeless. It's going to slip into that if you don't realize this is a drug problem. The seed to sale is a farce. You can look it up. There's plenty of inventory systems like that, but there are no good reviews on it as far as law enforcement or even any state agency. This will affect generations. Does this promote public health, safety, and welfare? On a personal note, 8 months ago, my wife and I lost a son to suicide. Drugs. Don't buy this car. Thank you.
Like yesterday, we're down to our final testimony from Nick Reinecker. Nick, unfortunately, we've only got a minute for you, so if you can very quickly summarize what you have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee for allowing me to speak today. My name is Nick Reinecker. I'm an opponent to this bill because it's bloated. I can't even tell what we're talking about anymore. This is supposed to be a cannabis bill. I've heard medical marijuana, industrial hemp. I'll send you all an email detailing my opposition, and you have my testimony, and please read it. The one thing I want to say is with those 478 or however many people that have Missouri medical cards right now, how are we going to enforce all this? We got state. Are we going to put, I mean, I just don't get how we're going to enforce this. So, you know, when we talk about kids, we allow Adderall in school. There's just, I apologize that we don't have more time, so I'll send you some stuff email-wise. I do thank you for allowing me to speak today. I'm against this bill. I'm for constitutional cannabis. I don't wear my red jacket anymore because I'm not about conserving slavery. Thank you. I'll stand.
Thank you, Nick. The same thing happened yesterday to the final conferee. We had to cut him short, but I appreciate it very much. So with that, we've run out our 40-minute clock. So now I want to open it up for questions from the committee. First of all, Senator Cluse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have a question, but I want to just speak. I've sat in on so many of these meetings over the last few years, and I want to say this today that I have actually been a proponent of medicinal marijuana for quite some time. Never recreational, but my hospice backdrop, and seeing the needs of people that have been ill and end-of-life care for palliative care. But, you know, people perish for lack of knowledge. And over the course of all the hearings that I have sat in on, I am going to just testify for a minute here that today I am no longer a proponent, I'm an opponent. And the reason of that is because of the knowledge and all of what we have been given. For me, over the last couple of years, sitting and listening to all of this testimony. And so I was wrong, and I apologize to my family because I have young boys. Young boys, I say, they're in their 30s now. Sorry, Chase. And constituents that I held because I did not know the effects of what this medicinal marijuana could have on individuals. So I apologize for that, and more so wherever you're at on this subject of marijuana, like me and as legislators, as we sit here today and have to make these hard decisions because we hear the heartfelt testimonies and yet we have to look at the facts and how do we process all that. And so that's what I've had to do. And in that processing, now that I got the truth and the knowledge, I got to have the wisdom to make the right decisions. And I'll tell you, Senator Holland yesterday, if I were still for this type of medicinal use, he pointed out 7 things that were very powerful testimony. One of the things he said that hit home, that no matter where we sit on this issue today, is it's going to require massive new policing policies. And our law enforcement is not just opposed to this legislation, they are strongly opposed to this legislation. And so when we look at the 4 different branches of our law enforcement agencies here in Kansas, we have to say, do we want to add something more to their list and their lack of help and just retaining officers and recruiting officers. And so from even that point alone, today, I stand against this legislation and this particular bill, and I hope other people will dig in and truly look at this, not just, from testimonies that are heartfelt, and I believe that in some cases maybe people have been helped, but looking at the facts today. And so I will not be supporting this, and I just wanted to share that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cluse. Senator Falscadeau, then Senator Blasey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, have sat on these committees and the hearings for at least the last 5 years. And initially, it started out being medical marijuana to help relieve pain. And then just in the last week or so, or when we've had these hearings, it's I've heard, as Nick said, recreational and just so much. So, and then the comments of the Vice Chair Cluse, that's interesting. I'm weighing a lot here today too, and although I hear from individuals, as you said, they swear on a Bible that I don't know if the gummies or the medical marijuana helps them, so, I want everybody to get help. But, Mr. Chairman, my question is for my sheriff, Jeff Easter, just so that those listening in, Sheriff Easter, and I still call you the best sheriff in town, and
Thank you.
You always take my calls, and I appreciate that. So that others aren't confused, Wichita City Council passed an ordinance with a certain amount of marijuana. You said, or someone said today that, everybody's not sitting in the county jails with a small portion, but just for the record, can you share what our city of Wichita, Cedric County, our ordinance of if you are stopped and you have a certain amount of marijuana, just share and confirm our ordinance there, please.
Yeah, so in the county, it's the same. We follow state statute, so it's illegal to possess marijuana. In the city, what they did is they decriminalized marijuana by saying that if you possess under a certain amount, I don't know exactly what that is, because I heard the mayor talk about, well, if you possess less than a pound or less, that's for personal consumption. So I don't know what the percentage is, because we don't enforce city ordinance. But yes, they decriminalized it where they took it off the books as being a criminal violation in city court.
Senator Blasey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you, Sheriff Easter. I think Mr. Reiniger said it best. This is very confusing how we got to this point with what's in this bill. So, I think the last 2 weeks we've heard a lot of testimony from the medical community and law enforcement, and I think their testimony has been very compelling. And in fact, I'd say we got to trust the science. I mean, the data is very compelling. So, with that, Mr. Chairman, if you're willing, I have an amendment. If we're willing to start diving into the bill.
I believe, given the time that we have to work any bill like this, over the next week, I think this is the time to do that, so I would accept that amendment. Let's finish questions first, and then we'll get your amendment. I think Senator Holscher first, and then any other questions, then we'll run the amendment. Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, for law enforcement, I don't know if maybe Sheriff Easter or whoever is here from law enforcement. My question is, does SB 135 include the items you asked for during the hearings last year?
It does have some of them, but not to the extent where we think they should be.
Okay. All right. And then I do have a second one, if I may. Somebody made the claim, and I don't know if it was you or who made the claim, regarding parents giving kids marijuana needlessly. Was that, I don't know who said that.
I'm not sure myself.
Okay, I know I heard somebody say that there were cases of parents needlessly giving marijuana to children. I would just ask for what evidence or documentation, because that's a pretty serious accusation.
I'm not sure who made that statement or whether, or I don't know. Not sure who, I don't see anybody stepping up to answer that question.
I'll just assume we don't have proof then. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, we'll close the questions for the committee, and then we do have an amendment from Senator Blasey.
If the revisor will pass it up, please, and I apologize. I thought we were moving on from the questions since we were having statements.
That's okay. We're going to go ahead and work this bill since this is really the only time we have.
On page 26, it reduces the grams for edibles from 3.5 to 2.5.
Okay, any, Senator Straub?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In light of all of the testimony that we've heard over the last couple days, both proponent and opponent testimony, and with the lengthiness of this bill, I would make a substitute motion to table this. I think that this definitely needs to be given a lot of thought, and concerning the testimony, especially that we heard today, I feel like we really need to protect our children, and I don't believe that we're ready to work this today, so I would move to table this.
Table the bill, just make sure, okay.
Yes.
So we have a substitute motion to table the bill. Do we have a second? Second. Oh, yes.
Lean on Jason, but I don't believe you can have a substitute motion when you don't have a motion.
I think I need a second for my motion.
Oh, that's true. Okay. So we need that's correct.
You don't have a motion on the bill.
We do not have a.
You have a motion to amend.
Motion to amend the bill. So we need a second on the amendment before we move to the substitute motion. Do we have a second on the amendment? See, second on the amendment from Senator Clue. So we have a motion on the, what is the proper order after we get the second? Do we vote on the amendment, then the substitute? Then a substitute motion. So we have that. So we have the motion and then a second from Senator Cluse on the amendment and a substitute motion on the amendment to,
Yes, Mr. Chair.
to table the bill.
Restate that. I have a substitute motion to table this, please.
Okay, I need a second on that. Second from Senator Cluse. The motion to table is non-debatable, so we'll put it to a vote. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bill is tabled. Committee, we have no additional work for today. We won't have a meeting tomorrow, and we will have a full week next week. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you for your work.